Everybody to today's webinar. My name is Jessica Feldan, and I am the Chief Executive of the American Friends of Bar-Ilan University. Today's discussion is one of global concern, but before we begin, I just want to recognize a number of organizations who partnered with us to promote this webinar. Illuminate Women, the Hadassah Foundation, the American Jewish Committee, Jewish Nevada, Loving Moms, Jewish Women's Foundation of Palm Beach, Florida, the Council General of Israel of the Pacific Northwest, National Council of Jewish Women, the Flesh Family Sinai Temple Israel Center. I also want to welcome my friends from Israel at Bar-Ilan University, as well as the other Bar-Ilan societies all over the world. Today's topic is very timely and critically important. It's about how Hamas used sexual violence as an act of war. It's something we've been talking about since October 7th. The whole Believe Israeli Women's movement started after October 7th. And our guest speaker today is Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari from Bar-Ilan University, who's the foremost legal scholar and champion of women's rights, not just in Israel, but around the world. She was also a vice chair of a UN committee focused on women's rights, working with an international community. The title that I love the most, and Ruth is smiling, is she's the director of something called the Rackman Center for the Advancement of the Status of Women in Israel. Ruth was giving women a voice way before October 7th. The Rackman Center, located at Bar-Ilan University, is a legal clinic, a legal center that helps women who don't have a voice. Actually, they help women navigate the legal system when trying to get a divorce. They help women who are abused by their spouses. They help women get legal custody of their children. There are many women who don't know how to navigate the legal system in Israel. They also advocate for women's rights by focusing on lobbying and creating laws. And the Rackman Center at Bar-Ilan University really is a powerhouse, and a powerhouse for women in need. Now, a while ago, when I was talking to Ruth about why there was such an issue with the world believing that Hamas used sexual violence as an act of war. And I remember what she said to me. She said, it's hard to prove something when there's no one to talk about it. There was nobody left. And it's not just women who were sexually abused. It was women, it was men, it was children. They were no longer alive. And so they could not give a voice to actually what happened. So Ruth was not willing to let that lie. And she, along with two very impressive women, Judge Nava Ben-Or and Colonel Sharon Zagagi Pinchas, got together and created something called the Dinah Project. And the Dinah Project's goal was to create proof to show exactly what happened on October 7th. And one time, Ruth, you might remember this, we had a conversation about the name, the Dinah Project. And if you know your Chumash, you know your Bible, you know the character Dinah, who was sexually abused, but you don't hear a lot from her after it happened. She really did not have a voice. It was her brothers who seemed to react to what happened to her, unless you actually read The Red Tent. And then you know, Anita Diamond kind of gave her a voice many, many, many years later. But these three women got together and created a document. They found proof of what happened. They created a roadmap for legal action so the world could not look away and hold Hamas accountable. Today, we're going to hear from Ruth. She's going to talk about her findings. She's going to talk about that roadmap. And then we're going to have some questions and answers. If you have some questions for Ruth, please put them in your chat. We'll try and get to as many questions as possible after Ruth gives her presentation. And again, if you want to support Ruth's work, helping women who have no voice in Israel, there's a QR code on your screen, and we will put a link in the chat, and every dollar helps Ruth do her work. So now I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Ruth Halperin-Kaddari. Ruth, you're on mute.
You would have guessed that after years and years of teaching on Zoom, during COVID and post-COVID, I would have remembered that. Thank you so much, Jessica. It's an honor for me to be present here, even virtually, within this large family of Bar-Ilan University, which is my home and has always been my home. And it is now the home of the Dinah Project under the auspices of the Rackman Center that I founded in honor and in the name of the late Rabbi Rackman more than 25 years ago. Having the Dinah Project become part of the Rackman Center was really a very natural expansion for us, because just like you said, Jessica, the Rackman Center has always seen its mission to bring justice to women in Israel and to do gender justice through law. And on October 7, we realized that another front where Israeli women, and later we also realized that it is actually not only women, and not just Israeli, but also Jewish women at large, another front for doing justice has opened. And a number of us, and it's not just Sharon and Nava, the Dinah Project is now composed also of Nurit Yaakov-Zinon, our art director, who actually translated our legal work into visual and artistic design, and Ita Prince-Gibson, who is our linguistics editor. A number of us has started working immediately on October 8, all in different paths, all with the aim of doing justice, of bringing recognition and justice to the victims of sexual violence of October 7. And it was kind of like an organic work from the bottom up. And after a few months, we realized that we do need a house, we do need a home, an organizational home, and it was only natural to incorporate it into the Rackman Center. And that's how we really could continue to do all the work that we've been doing. And what I want to do today is to actually present you with the highlight of our work. Maybe you've already seen it in the news, in the media, because thankfully we really got, I think I can say, a huge media coverage. Here you can see the motto of the Dinah Project: recognition and justice for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. And this is the cover of our book, the book that we just published less than 2 weeks ago. We launched it at very nice, if I could say, if I could use this word, respected event at the president's residence in Jerusalem. We were hosted by the First Lady of Israel, Michal Herzog, and since then, we've been giving many presentations and briefings on our findings, and this is what I will want to do here today. And as I said, I'm particularly thrilled, although it's really inappropriate to use any of these words to this context, but still, for lack of a better word, I'm particularly thrilled to do it within the family of Bar-Ilan University, my own home. The Dinah Project at the Rackman Center at Bar-Ilan University was established with the aim of fighting denialism. I think this is an experience that so many of us have felt immediately after October 7. I can recall myself, my own a personal experience, expecting all my former colleagues from the UN committee on which I served for 12 years, expecting them to say something, to recognize that sexual violence was used as a weapon of war on October 7, to condemn Hamas to do that, to recognize that they committed crimes against humanity, and there was silence. And then the silence turned into denialism, not by everybody, and we can address that later, but most of the international women's organizations, many of the international human rights organizations, including formal institutions within the United Nations, stayed silent, and some of them even turned into denialism. But we also realized pretty soon that this controversy and the silence is really something that can be found in many contexts when sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. And just think about what we know today, or are starting to know today, about what took place just a few days ago in Syria against the Druze minority. And who is speaking up? Are there voices saying something? It takes time. And sometimes the world remains silent. And yet there were very specific traits to this silence and to this denialism with respect to October 7. So that's where we started operating, with the aim of preventing the impunity to perpetrators, overcoming some internal systemic hurdles and impediments within international institutions and within international law that hinder doing justice for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. And that's where our added value, as coming from academia, as experts in law. My co-authors, Sharon and Nava, are both litigators, previously litigators in criminal law. Nava is a former judge in the district court, judge, and former deputy state prosecutor in criminal law. And Sharon has formerly been the chief military prosecutor. So all of us have our expertise, and we use the law to advance the recognition and the justice. And we are doing all this through rigorous legal work, fact-based advocacy, and developing legal theses to advance our work. One of our achievements was already last year, when we were very instrumental in bringing over the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten, who had formerly been a colleague of mine on the CEDAW committee, on the UN CEDAW committee. And she was trusted with a mandate to conduct a fact-finding mission in Israel in January and February of 2024. And on March 4th, 2024, she published these findings, which are highlighted here in red, which were really a game changer in terms of starting to set the record straight. Found reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence was perpetrated in multiple locations, including rape and gang rape in at least 3 locations. They found pattern of victims, and they found that sexual violence was still going on in captivity against the hostages that at that time were still being held by Hamas. And this is perhaps the point to pause for a minute and recognize that there still are 50 hostages held within Hamas as we speak, 20 of them alive, and they should be brought home as soon as possible. They should have been back home much, much before. Going on, as I said, this was a game-changing report, and I will skip the next lines for the sake of time, and let us now turn to the book, whose title is A Quest for Justice, October 7 and Beyond. But before I turn to the book itself, I do need to say something about what is conflict-related sexual violence and how it is different from what we refer to sometimes as everyday sexual violence, ordinary sexual violence. When sexual violence is used as a weapon of war, it is not directed against the specific individual. Yes, she is the direct victim, or he is the direct victim, but their bodies are in fact symbols for the bodies of the whole nation. And when the specific woman is invaded and violated, it is as if the whole nation of the enemy is being conquered and is being invaded and violated. And when sexual violence is used as a tool of war, it is often not just rape, perhaps not even rape, but, and here, this will probably be just the only triggering part in my presentation, it is directed against the sexual organs the victim, because they symbolize the woman's body and her are very used as a weapon of war. And it took international law and international institutions centuries to even recognize that rape in war and sexual violence in war is not simply, I don't know, collateral damage and the price of war. It is a war crime, and it is crime against humanity. And it was only in the 90s, the special tribunals for former Yugoslavia and for the genocide in Rwanda, where international law actually started prosecuting for sexual violence as a weapon of war. But even until now, there are hardly any prosecutions and any convictions by the ICC, International Criminal Court, on the usage of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Why is it the case? And why is it so difficult for us to actually gain the recognition from the world at large? The attack on October 7 was unprecedented in scale, locations, cruelty, but there are no sexual violence survivors who are able to speak for the very grim reality that most of them had been murdered immediately after they were assaulted, sometimes during as part of the assault. And there were no physical forensic evidence, again, for a very simple reason, that it was a war zone, a battlefield. The bodies were collected under fire. The immediate task was just to identify them and put them to rest, bury them as soon as possible, according to Jewish tradition. And the state was not prepared to tackle or to confront this kind of crime, which had never before been part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, at least not since the establishment of the State of Israel, and I'm not going back to 1929. But these first two characteristics of the attack that I refer to, no speaking survivors, very little forensic evidence, is demonstrated in an extreme way on October 7, but again, it is not unique to October 7. And it is apparent in many areas, in many instances, in many cases where sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. And this is what causes international law to be almost powerless or paralyzed when we want to seek justice and entity for perpetrators of sexual violence in war. And our book takes this up front. It contains the most comprehensive assessment of the actual sexual violence that was perpetrated during the attack of October 7 and thereafter in captivity, but it goes much further than that. It goes beyond the documentation to provide a framework for accountability and for prosecution of Hamas for perpetrating sexual violence and using it as a weapon of war. And our goal is to set the historical record straight. And unlike previous reports, it's not the first report to be published on October 7 sexual violence, but what we did is going through, spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours of going through all the existing data and information which is available, mostly open sources, available online and published regarding sexual violence of October 7, but nobody before us actually took everything together and aggregated them and then analyzed them from a legal perspective according to the evidentiary value of each piece of information. And as I said, we are also using October 7 as a case study for the unique challenges in prosecuting conflict-related sexual violence to create a legal framework that allows, and we argue, calls for prosecution through establishing principle of joint criminal responsibility for perpetrators when they're involved in such mass atrocities and mass attacks. And our call is for the Secretary General to include Hamas in the blacklist of those organizations and entities that use sexual violence as a weapon of war. Now, I mentioned the evidentiary framework. I will just give here very few bottom lines of our work, which of constructing this huge matrix, Excel sheet with hundreds of entries in it that could allow us to conclude that there is one survivor of attempted rape of October 7 who never spoke before, and 15 of the returned hostages who told their experiences of different forms of sexual violence in captivity. And perhaps more important than that is that there are 17 witnesses in real time, eyewitnesses and ear witnesses who saw and heard in real times, describing at least 15 cases of sexual violence on October 7 and some in captivity. And they describe at least 5 different cases of rapes and gang rapes, which also involve mutilations. And this is something that was not put forward before. This slide is a more comprehensive bottom line of our findings, and I will skip that for the sake of time. I want to get to the legal framework and very, very succinctly to explain that what we're doing is we're taking known and established legal theses that are already accepted in other areas, and we are calling to use them within the framework, within the context of conflict-related sexual violence. So we are introducing this framework to establish criminal responsibility in the context of mass attacks, which are motivated by genocidal intent. And this is very important to recognize that Hamas terrorists entered Israel with a genocidal intent. And therefore, when each and every member of Hamas, and we're not talking about the mob that entered afterwards, we're talking about actual Hamas terrorists, the Nukhba terrorists, which are held by Israel. Some of them are being held by Israel now. And we are arguing that each of them joined this coordinated, ideologically driven attack aimed to dehumanize and to totally describe Israel and Israeli people. They all bear responsibility for everything that occurred during this attack, for the full range of atrocities that were committed as part of this attack, even if it is impossible to prove that this specific terrorist did this act, and if it is impossible to actually identify and to point to a specific terrorist, and also impossible to point to a specific victim. But it is almost always impossible to make these connections in the context of conflict-related sexual violence. And if we do not adopt this thesis, which also has implications in terms of the evidentiary, the evidence law, which I'll get to in a minute, if we don't do this, if the legal system does not do that, if the prosecution in Israel does not adopt this line of thinking, then the result is that they walk away unprosecuted, they walk away without being judged and prosecuted for these sexual atrocities. And the message is that there is full impunity for this horrific kind of crimes. So here, and I won't go line by line, but we are delineating our theory of how to use those evidences, those testimonies, those indications, and those informations that form circumstantial evidence, how to use it for the prosecution of the sexual violence that was perpetrated on October 7, while not lowering the bar for evidence that is needed to hold these trials. We show how this is in line with existing criminal law, but we ask for a paradigm shift to understand that in these cases, and October 7 is a case study or a test case for all these cases of conflict-related sexual violence. In these cases, these are the tools that must be used in order to gain justice. And as I already said, our call is for the UN Secretary General to include Hamas in his annual reports annex, in the blacklist to his annual report. And we call for the recognition of all these crimes that were perpetrated on October 7 as crimes against humanity. And we call upon the Israeli prosecutorial authorities to press sexual violence charges against Hamas terrorists. So this is really in a nutshell, if I can say so, the crux of our work so far. As I already indicated in the beginning of the slideshow, we have been giving hundreds and hundreds of presentations and briefings all through the past year. We've met high-level diplomats and key figures in the international arena, all with this mission. And we really hope that now that we managed to put it all together in this book and to publish it, we really hope that we will be able to do something, to shift the awareness and to shift public opinion on this issue and do justice. Set the record straight and set the historical record straight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. We have a number of questions that have come in. Are you ready? So you and I had a conversation about what it was like to work on a UN committee and an Israeli and representing Israel before October 7th, and then what it was like after October 7th, and the shift that happened. And you really kind of understood who your friends were and who your friends weren't. And now that this publication has come out, the question is about the anti-Israel bias in the international community, international forum. How do you raise awareness? How do you navigate that? And what's your assessment of their reaction?
Well, this is really a very, very complex and also personal and professional, and like everything in life, everything is blurred, and the personal is political, the political is personal. An Israeli within that UN committee was not simple experience. I did face more challenges than colleagues from other, maybe should say, northern countries, from the global north. However, others from other countries also face challenges when they are on the international arena. I believed, and that was also my experience, that these particular bodies, which are the human rights committees, those committees that are in charge of overseeing a range of international human rights conventions, I believed that they are little less political than other entities within the UN. And I think that this belief was fact-based. I, as an Israeli, did manage to move along some very important achievements and changes in the international arena. I spearheaded an adoption of an international norm that has to do with economic consequences of divorce, and I did not feel that I had more difficulties to do that because I'm an Israeli. I headed an inquiry against the UK on the abortion regime, the restrictive abortion regime that was then in place in Northern Ireland, and our inquiry, our report actually had direct effect in changing the law in Northern Ireland. And I did all this as an Israeli, and I was elected 3 times to this committee as an Israeli. And I think that that's what led me to expect on October 8th, when I immediately emailed my former colleagues, telling them what we knew then, which of course is a lot less than what we know now, but alerting them to just, watch and see what we are finding out, what Hamas did to us. Recall all the horror stories that we heard from women in Bosnia and women in Darfur and Yazidi women, and recognize that now Israeli women had been victims for this kind of crime of sexual violence as a weapon of war. And they did not get back to me. And when they finally did publish a statement, which I knew they could come to an agreement after hours and hours of deliberation, the statement was so shallow, really said nothing. They didn't mention Hamas, they didn't mention Israel, they didn't mention sexual violence. They just spoke about peace in the world, and women and peace. And I remember getting this statement on the last Friday of the session, their October session when they have met, and I just burst into tears. It was really a blow. Having said that, and after almost 2 years in this turbulent existence, I can look back and say that things are a little more nuanced. And it's not that everybody was silent. There were some entities within the UN and some international organizations that were honest to their role in protecting the rights of all women everywhere and all human rights everywhere. And again, mention the special representative of the Secretary General in charge of this topic of sexual violence in conflict. And I can also say that waiting immediately after October 7 is acceptable, and not hurrying to issue statements could be acceptable until the very first eyewitness came out with her testimony. And that was in mid-November, when the first eyewitness, young woman survivor from the Nova Music Festival, when her testimony was published by Israeli police, describing in great details, which I will not repeat now, but describing a horrific scene of gang rape and mutilation. When she faced the world and the police took her to the place where she hid in the bushes, she identified it, and they found some personal items there not belonging to her. So it was all corroborated. That was the minute when UN women should have stopped their silence. That was the minute when the whole feminist credo of believing women and I believe you, here we are with a survivor. Yes, she's not a first-hand survivor of the sexual violence because the woman who was assaulted was murdered. And this particular witness, eyewitness, saw her being murdered. And that is what she is now reporting on. That was the time when the silence should have ended. And it is still a sense of betrayal by many of these organizations. And yet I know that maybe I'm contradicting myself, but I am not willing to give up the international mechanisms. And I'm not willing to give up finding the ways to work within the system and to change the system from within. And this is actually what we are also attempting to do in the Dinah Project and at the Rackman Center, in everything that we're doing to change from within. Our call to the Secretary General is to use the existing mechanisms and blacklist Hamas. And our call for the judicial system is to still use the law in order to pursue justice. So it's a long answer to a complex question.
Many of us are very frustrated from the outside, but you're actually jumping in to the inside and trying to change from within. So that's amazing. I have an interesting question. To your knowledge, did any of the Bedouin victims attacked or taken hostage experience sexual violence? And what are the cultural factors that might influence how sexual violence is experienced or reported in their community?
I do not know specifically about Bedouin victims. I have to repeat, the bodies that were collected were not forensically examined. So the hardcore forensic evidence was actually buried with the victims. And in terms of the returned hostages, the reports that came from male returned hostages were not of Bedouin returned hostages. This is not to say that it's conclusive, because we keep updating our metrics because more information is surfacing. We see this dynamic with the returned hostages, who were slowly starting to, I don't know, overcome, I don't know if you can ever heal, and probably not until all the hostages are returned, but they have started gradually to speak more freely about what they experienced. So I think it is to be expected that they and more survivors would speak. We also know that there are living survivors of the sexual violence of October 7, not many, but there are, and they're being treated, and they are unable to speak now. We also know from the way that I refer to, for lack of a better term, the everyday sexual violence, that survivors take time before they speak, and sometimes they never speak. Bosnian women, some spoke 20 years after they were assaulted for the first time, after 20 years. Now, I'm not sure I understood the question about the cultural. Was it asking about Bedouin culture?
To actually talk about it, to actually come out and say what happened, and B, how the community reacts. I think that was really the question. Is there a difference? Is it, are you finding there's a difference?
So I think we can expect differences. And we see this in other contexts when sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. The reaction of the community changes. And because the stigmatization and the shame that is attached to being sexually violated, regrettably, is something that is found in almost every society. This is also partially what makes this weapon so potent, and why it is used so often as a weapon of war. As I said, it's a mass atrocity, a mass crime, which is directed against the community as a whole. It is using the women, but it is actually also torturing the men because they could not protect their own women. And it is using this ongoing stigmatization and shame to prolong this torture. And part of the work that we are also trying to do, and there are so many other organizations all over the world, and our aim also at the Dinah Project is also to collaborate with some of these organizations, is also to change these cultural notions, these biases, these stigmas, to make them aware that it is the shame of the perpetrators, not of the victims, and victims should be welcomed back into the communities, and it is the perpetrators who should really pay the price, and that is what we are aiming to achieve.
A few people ask this in different ways, so I'm going to combine the question. Who is actually responsible for pursuing legal action in these cases, and what is the main legal and jurisdictional obstacles, whether in Israeli courts or internationally?
Right. So as I stressed, our call is, first of all, besides blacklisting Hamas, which is not a judicial procedure, it is more a political recognition by the UN. In terms of judicial proceedings, legal proceedings, criminal proceedings, we are addressing our call first and foremost to the Israeli prosecutorial authorities, who are still, to the best of our knowledge, contemplating how to prosecute, whom to prosecute, where to prosecute, and we want to convince them to make sure that when eventually legal proceedings or indictments are being pursued, when they will start being charged, that sexual violence, charges for sexual violence will be included in these indictments and in these prosecutions, and not only murders. So this is directed at the Israeli authorities. Then there are possibilities for jurisdictions out of state, international jurisdiction, but there are quite a number of other legal hurdles to employ these kinds of international jurisdictions. In some jurisdictions, victims who are citizens of those jurisdictions can bring charges against Hamas perpetrators. It will probably be very difficult to bring charges on sexual violence in such cases, but our work can serve as additional background when such charges are being brought. We should also mention that within the International Criminal Court, when arrest warrants were issued against Muhammad Def, the issue of sexual violence was included in that arrest warrant. It is no longer relevant, of course, because Def was killed by Israel, as was Hania and Sinwar. So in terms of the International Criminal Court, it is probably less relevant now.
Ruth, I'm gonna switch a little bit to what the Rackman Center is doing and working domestically in terms of representing Israeli women who are sexually abused at home or don't know where to turn. What has the Rackman Center done, and what are you doing to help give those women a voice as well internally within Israel?
So maybe I'll mention an issue in which we are very much involved now, and it has to do directly also with the war, with the ongoing war, 21 months of ongoing war, when we are witnessing increase in rates of domestic violence, where women who call into the helpline of the Rackman Center to receive, we call it first aid legal advice, a growing number of them are reporting being subject to domestic violence and to, sadly, to even harsher aspects of harsher types of domestic violence. And we led the work to change the law so that as part of an injunction that is issued, that a court can issue against a partner who is being abusive against the woman, as part of that injunction, he can also be restrained by it's called the electronical bracelet, like monitoring electronically.
Like an ankle bracelet, and like, yeah, people who come out of prison have these ankle bracelets to monitor them.
Exactly, ankle bracelets.
Yeah.
So the law was changed, and we really led the work to change the law. However, as so often happens in Israel, the gap between the law on the books and the law in action, it has hardly been implemented. So while there were hundreds of petitions to have injunctions against abusive husbands or partners, there had only been 18 such restraining orders using this law. So this is what we are now attempting to raise awareness of, of judges, that they have this tool at their disposal, and raise awareness of lawyers to argue that, to ask that for their clients, and of course our own clients. Another work in which we are involved, again, that has to do sadly with domestic violence, because this is really a recurring issue in the reality for Israeli women now, is the very high rate of licenses to carry weapons. And it is a direct result of the war, where the Minister for Internal Security actually very much eased the criteria to apply for licenses. And we get calls from women, from divorced women, or women who had been separated from their partners, telling us, I know that my ex has now been issued and he carries a gun. What do I do? How can I protect myself? And part of what we're working for, and again, it demonstrates our added value as being able to navigate all branches of the law, to work with the Ministry of Welfare, and to work with the Ministry of Health, and to work with the Ministry of Justice, and not just represent women and change the law through case by case, but also change the law or change the regulations from above. So what we're working on is to mandate a screening so that information that is obtained or that is maintained within the family courts about abusive men, this information must be also at the disposal of the police and of the welfare department when they are being asked to issue a license. So, to make the connections between all these bodies, it's very difficult to do that in any bureaucracy, but it is just one example of how you have to be alert to these deficiencies, to these lacunas, and to know how to work from within the system in order to change it.
I also know you work with religious women in terms of getting a get in the religious courts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So many of our clients are women who cannot exit their marriages. They are agunot or mesoravot get. And we have a specific department within our legal aid clinic, headed by a wonderful male lawyer, Shai Zilberberg, who is actually a graduate of Bar-Ilan Law School, a graduate also of the Rackman Center Law Clinic. I'm really very proud to say that so far, we have 100% success rate in freeing women from their unwanted marriages. And again, it demonstrates our ability to raise innovative halachic arguments using the halacha itself, using the religious law itself, and create novel arguments that are sometimes accepted by the rabbinical courts. And maybe I should also add that another achievement which we are responsible for together with other organizations, together with ITIM organization and with the Kolech organization, we just secured a precedent-setting decision by the High Court of Justice just last week to allow women to stand for the rabbinical examinations, to allow learned women, very high level degree of religious knowledge, who learned in the midrashot and spent years achieving the level which is necessary to pass the rabbinic examinations. It's like the equivalent of the bar examination, yeah? And the rabbinate refused to have them, to allow them to pass the examinations. And we finally, after years of leading this legal battle, we secured this precedent-setting decision, and it remains to be seen how the rabbinate will handle this.
Ruth, when you see a problem, you don't let go. You just don't let go, which is amazing, amazing. The Rackman Center is located in the law school at Bar-Ilan. Is it used as a teaching? Do you teach, or do you have interchange with the law students so that they can get experience in a lot of these matters? Because that's really important.
So first of all, I teach family law at Bar-Ilan Faculty of Law, and I also teach feminist critique of law. And the Rackman Center runs a legal aid clinic for women in divorce proceedings as part of our legal aid program. So each year, between 16 to 20 students can enroll in our legal aid clinic, and they really get a hands-on experience of how to represent the women who are represented by the Rackman Center. Each 2 students accompany each case directed by one of our lawyers. They attend the meetings, they write briefings, they're really trained in this very, very difficult and challenging area of law. And we really train them with feminist perspective to do gender justice and to do justice for women. We're very proud with our graduates. They're now based in very, very important positions in the area of law in Israel. And it's part of our mission to educate the next generation.
Amazing, amazing. Before we end, I keep getting this question. What do you need? What kind of support do you need? And what kind of collaborations would be helpful for you? Because this is such important work that you know, you're a woman standing on, people standing on your giant shoulders, but I'm assuming that others can help in some way.
Well, first of all, we're always in need of resources, and we are very, very grateful for all those organizations who do help us, many women's organizations, women's federations in the US and beyond. And you can see all our partners and friends on the website of the Rackman Center and on the website of the Dinah Project. In terms of specifically the work that the Dinah Project is doing in seeking recognition and justice for the victims of October 7 sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence beyond, I urge you to go on the Dinah website, to follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, and amplify the message. Because much of the work now is actually being conducted in the virtual sphere, on the internet, in the media. And that's where each and every one can actually make a change. And you need to know the information, you need to have access to the message. And this is, again, this is part of what we took upon ourselves. So you can find it on our website and on our social media outlets.
Thank you. I think that's about it. I want to personally thank you as a friend, as a colleague, and as somebody I truly admire. Your work is incredible. I want to thank all those organizations that helped promote this webinar. Like you just heard Ruth, it's really important that we get the word out, and we need to be our own advocates. If we learned anything, we know that. So thank you, everybody. Please look at the Rackman Center website, the Dinah Project, and let us know how you think you can help. And we look forward to hearing from everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you.